Who is Dorothy Day? Well, for our Catholic audience, she's one of the trendiest saints. Um, one of the trendiest saints of the 21st century for the kids to collect trading cards for. She also has a lot to do with the Spanish flu, which is what we're talking about today in our continuing Making of America series, part
15?
9. Yeah, we're calling this episode 15 total, but ignore that. That's way too confusing. I think we're at approximately part 9 of the Making of America series. So, listeners, thank you for joining us tonight, and hold on for the wild ride that we have ahead. Wild and thoughtful ride. Again, we do not have our usual host, Landon, so you're going to have to bear with me and my co-host for this evening, Matt Bubonic Plague Schultz, Ross. I can't think of any
Swine flu.
bird, yeah, Swine Flu Johnson, and Mike never get sick Schaefer. So thank you for joining us here. We're doing a little bit of different spin. Not exactly a speech that's audible, but a speech of the heart is going to be kind of our main focal point platform for discussing the Spanish flu and making some comparisons to COVID-19. And of course, thinking them in the context of how each of these, but especially the Spanish flu, shaped America, since that's, of course, the mini series that we're in right now. Um, the letter I found is from, it's technically not from the Library of Congress. I believe it was, for some reason, stored in New Mexico's archives regarding some Native American um, materials. I think because the young woman who wrote this letter was Native American herself, and she uh, touches on that in this particular letter. This letter that Lucian, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, it's spelled Lutiant. She wrote this to her friend Louise while she was waiting at the train station in St. Louis, our Union Station, not too far away from me here. Um, the letter is sort of fun and interesting because it goes sort of all over the place. Not in any sort of weird way, but just touching upon the flu itself and Lucient's experiences with that, but also her being in love with the soldier. It sounds like it's something out of a movie. Which I'm sure we'll touch on some of the details of that a little bit later. Um, and she describes a little bit of just the nature of the flu itself. So, without further ado, this letter, it's about 5 pages long or so. I'm going to pull out a paragraph, sort of set things up for us here, where she describes, um, her work as a nurse with some of these flu victims. Here we go. When I was in the officers' barracks, 4 of the officers of whom I had charge died. 2 of them were married and called for their wife nearly all the time. It was sure pitiful to see them die. I was right in the wards alone with them each time, and oh, the first one that died sure unnerved me. I had to go to the nurses' quarters and cry it out. The other 3 were not so bad. Really. Louise, orderlies carried the dead soldiers out on stretchers at the rate of 2 every 3 hours for the first 2 days. Were there, is how she has it written, but we were there. 2 German spies posing as doctors were caught giving these influenza germs to the soldiers, and they were shot last Saturday morning at sunrise. It is such a horrible thing. It is hard to believe, and yet such things happen almost every day in Washington. So that letter is dated October 17th, 1918.
The German spies thing kind of surprised me. Like, when I was
Yeah.
reading the letter, when I was reading the letter for the first time, it's like, oh, a nurse, Spanish flu, and then all of a sudden there were 2 like it sounded like an Indiana Jones movie. Like there were
Yeah.
2 German spies, so they got shot.
Can you imagine if during COVID-19 international spies were distributing COVID germs? There would be social instability of the nth degree versus here, yeah, they handled it on the spot, grabbed them and shot them. Oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, like, yeah, there would be social instability. I feel like there would be, but I don't know. I don't know. I really honestly don't know how the public would take that sort of thing, just because, like, there's this, I don't know. We have the sense of xenophobia here that, like, they never had. Like, oh, German spies, let's shoot them. We'd be like, oh, like, Chinese spies, probably conspiracy theory. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I'm pretty
like,
sure a spy. I'm pretty
yeah,
sure
it's
a
just,
spy, but I don't think I can say that.
Well, hold on. What was the point you were just saying about xenophobia, us compared to them?
well, I guess just the initial thought process for them. Well, I mean, and this, like, there may or may not have been more legitimacy to this, but they were like German spies posing as doctors, let's shoot them, and,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
not really make a story out of it. Whereas if anything like that were to have happened here, it'd be like Chinese spies must have been a hoax.
Yeah.
I,
Even
I
worse
guess that's
about
that I can't
like
really see. Yeah, I just can't conceivably
yeah.
imagine
And
any.
we were obviously at war. We were at war with the Germans at that time too. It's kind of another layer of I mean it'd be like if, the Taliban had distributed COVID germs. Wild. When I was reading this letter, um, a, it reminded me of a couple of things. One particular thing that I mentioned as kind of the teaser for this episode is it reminded me of Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day, I think officially Blessed Dorothy Day. Her life went from, I think, roughly 1880 to, I guess, 1890-ish until 1970-ish. So she would have been about Lucience's age here. She also worked as a nurse, I think technically a nurse in training in New York, I think. And it sounds similar, just this emphasis on the intimacy and uh, depth of experience that they had with the Spanish flu. But at the same time, continuing to live their lives in fairly ordinary ways, for better or for worse. Um, there's an excerpt that I found which I think sort of captures Dorothy Day's experience as it compares to Lucience's here. Um, and also with sort of the contrast that I think will kind of be a little bit of a focal point for our discussion here, where you have a disease which objectively was far more deadly, far more prevalent, but being Spanish flu compared to COVID, um, but had a marginal, almost non-existent existence within like the social consciousness, which is completely opposite of COVID, where it is takes up a massive amount of our social awareness, right? So a quote here from Alfred Crosby, I think really captures that particular idea, which I'm going to read. This is from an article from the Smithsonian that describes what Alfred Crosby wrote there in the 1976 book, comparing Spanish flu to COVID. Well, just commenting on Spanish flu. Americans barely noticed and didn't recall, but if one turns to intimate accounts, to autobiographies of those who were not in positions of authority, to collections of letters written by friend to friend, if one asks those who lived through the pandemic for their reminiscences, then it becomes apparent that Americans did notice. Americans were frightened. The courses of their lives were deflected into new channels, and that they remember the pandemic quite clearly and often acknowledge it as one of the most influential experiences of their lives.
Hmm. What do you guys think is the difference? And that maybe, like, Mike, if you wanted to go somewhere else, like, we can maybe do this later.
No,
But
no, I had nothing pertinent necessarily. The difference in what do you mean?
Like, I guess I don't know. It's curious how, I mean, maybe it's just the middle of World War One, and that like was just the dominant paradigm through which people were kind of viewing their lives and the country's kind of collective mission. And we don't have anything. We didn't have anything of that magnitude in the midst of COVID. I don't know. I suppose that's the only thing that comes to mind. But like, how did the Spanish flu become something so intimately important, but I guess collectively forgotten? Whereas
Yeah,
COVID, something that I guess maybe the opposite. Not that, I mean, I know a lot of people have been affected, but
well, I mean,
it
I think the opposite is something that, yeah, I was sort of just alluding to, and I think it's something worth considering in itself. I think the only way people could interact, if you will, with the Spanish flu was like one on one, right? Seeing their loved ones die from it, seeing their patients die from it or be sick from it. Versus with COVID, you obviously have that to a lesser degree, though. But you're also interacting with it in the digital space, right? And not even just the digital space, you're interacting it, as ridiculous as it is in a conservative way or liberal way, or moderate way for that matter as well. Um, so this almost as if like, well, yeah, I'll sort of start there. So I think that's sort of a interest. So it sort of has its own life of its own in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think, yeah, kind of jumping off that, like not like, oh, fake news media, but just like the presence of national media that can cover it and spread the news was different. Obviously just like with technology, we're just much further along, but then kind of like I think we alluded to earlier, like World War One's going on. So, President Wilson doesn't even mention the Spanish flu. So, people, Trump gets a really hard time, not necessarily, not saying he did a good job at managing it, but, takes a lot of slack for not doing enough. Like Woodrow Wilson never mentioned the Spanish flu, despite the fact that it infected, I think, what was it? 33% of the population or something? I mean, just huge.
Yep.
So despite the fact that it affects a greater percentage of the population, and I think kills pretty much a similar number of people that COVID has, despite, again, a much smaller population, um, the president doesn't even mention it because of probably fear of bad media coverage in the midst of a war. So, where today it's just in your face. I mean, 24/7, like you said. I mean, one, just the media coverage of it just is constant, but then also, like Mike alluded to, like kind of now we have these conservative and liberal factions that I feel like people just dig their heels in even more, and you know they want to have a stronger opinion than maybe they do because they're it fits well with some group that they want to be a part of or something. But yeah, I mean, it's, what is it? So we've got 33% of the population gets infected with the Spanish flu versus only 10% with COVID. Um, Pretty similar number of both a little over, was it 600,000 deaths for both of them?
Closer to 700,000 for Spanish flu. Yep.
Okay, but I mean, not same ballpark. We'll put it that way, despite a much smaller U.S. population at the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's clarify that as well right now. Present day American population. You guys should know that one off the top of your heads.
300.
330 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
I was going to say
And
300 million.
1918, we're at 103 million. So we're one third of the population of then. One third, but I guess 12% higher death rate.
So it was a
Sure.
big deal.
Yep.
Yeah. Which, interestingly enough, kind of reading about some of the stuff, I feel like you could almost play the game. Like, you could read about someone's response, whether it was the town's response to something going on or people's response to masks. Like, I feel like we could play a fun game that's like, this is what someone did or said. Was that Spanish flu or COVID? Because some of the things were just, I felt like, eerily the same. Um, I'm thinking of the what was it? I forget the name. The parade in Pittsburgh or I forget the name of it. I apologize, but the pretty much Pittsburgh or was it Philadelphia? It was Philadelphia. Sorry, Philadelphia had some sort of parade planned, and they went ahead with it. And it reminded me of what was that biker rally in South Dakota, right? People were like, "Don't do it, don't do it," and they went ahead with it. Where like St. Louis at the time of the Spanish flu was on like total lockdown. So just this idea that even within the U.S., people are handling it so differently, and then kind of San Francisco issues a mask mandate and people got fined. It was $5, which I think I looked it up is like $89 in today's money. So you get a $90 fine for not wearing a mask. And yet they start what was it called? The Anti-Mask League. Was that the name of the group in San Francisco? And their first meeting drew like 4,000 to 5,000 people. So many people were just
that
like,
was all Spanish flu.
Yeah, sorry, that's Spanish flu. So I mean, you've got again like you've got a town issues a mask mandate. There's a fine if you're not wearing it, and a large group of people form a coalition that called the Anti-Mask League. Like again, like I don't. It's just so like
it's
Spanish flu or COVID.
I mean that kind of information would not have affected my decision ever to not wear a mask or wear a mask. But so much of our dialogue from professionals on, here's X, Y, and Z reasons to wear a mask. I would imagine sharing like that kind of history, like you just shared, like that seems like that'd be influential information to a large portion of the audience, especially Americans, conservatives, they/we to some extent are more conscientious people. And so history tends to influence us more, and to know that, hey, America actually has already had mask mandates before, and it didn't result in an utter destabilization of our freedoms. Like, look, there's something there. Yeah.
I did a little bit of math on the death or percentage of the population who died from COVID versus Spanish flu. The percentage of the U.S. population that died from the Spanish flu was 3.5 times as much as the as COVID. So just for
what was
a little perspective.
Straight percentage of our population that died then?
So it was 0.6 died from the Spanish flu, 0.6% of the population. And it was 0.18% of the population died from COVID.
Huh. Okay,
I like
now
the
I'm
3 point.
curious, like relative, like how the U.S. did relative to the world with Spanish flu versus COVID. Now I'm interested in that number. Um, but we don't necessarily need to.
Steve's off tonight, so
He's off with Landon, helping plan Landon's wedding. They've gotten real close to things there.
do you guys think though? So like when I first hear that, it's like, oh, the Spanish flu sounds worse as far as same amount of more people died, yet smaller population, so larger percentage population for people that can do math. But like we said earlier, but there wasn't some national narrative during the Spanish flu. So a lot of people kind of just went about their business, right? So had there not been this huge, if it was not hugely discussed in the media and very present and in your face, do you think that if we had just not had that, the COVID numbers would have been worse? That makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question.
I mean, the answer would have to be yes, at least to some extent. I just don't know how bad it would be. Somebody might have ran a model or something, but.
Ran a model of what exactly?
So like, when you look at the numbers, the Spanish flu seems worse, right? if you have a smaller population, but similar amounts of deaths, right? A higher mortality rate, all of that. But at the same time, like we kind of said earlier, like the president never mentions the Spanish flu, and it's not necessarily maybe in the social consciousness as much as COVID. And there maybe aren't these huge lockdowns that we had for the last, for 2020. So had people and the nation acted in the same way in both the Spanish, and people during COVID, the COVID pandemic, if people had acted in the same way that they did during the Spanish flu pandemic, would the numbers have been worse? Does that make sense? And
Nope.
I would assume the numbers would have been worse, but I just don't know how you tell how bad they would have been.
Yeah, I mean, that'd definitely be interesting to project. That would be very difficult to like do accurately, though. I imagine.
Right.
I mean, the inputs you decide on would determine the outputs, and you could probably make a lot of cases for any combination of inputs to use for that.
Yeah. I've sort of been thinking about this thought recently, and I think it applies here. So I'll open sort of this thought experiment. You basically have three general factions, and just focusing in on masking. I'm sure, in fact, there's significant overlap with vaccines as well, but just focus on masking here. You basically have three groups of people. In the most simple thought approach to it as possible. People who are going to wear a mask because they're overly fearful. That's true. That's definitely a percentage of people wear masks for that reason. They're going to jump on it. There's people who are not going to wear masks, period, just because they don't like being told what to do. And then you have a group of people who are going to wear masks because they just listen to what experts say. If they were, trained to become a strong person, they're going to study what strong people have to say. So you have these three different groups. So the thought experiment is this. If we can agree that those are the only three groups, the only three psychological approaches to wearing masks or not, how much can you realistically believe that these three groups are going to be influenced by the sort of like floating abstract narrative that, as Ross was sort of saying, exists much more now, but it seems to have sort of existed to some extent in the Spanish flu as well. If you have these anti-masking leagues emerging, then presumably I'd have to imagine that some sort of language like what we hear today would sort of also exist there. What do you guys think?
I think I would disagree that those are the three camps. I mean, I think if you look from a 30,000 foot view, I suppose, I see what you mean. And I think that might be accurate. But the way mask wearing plays out, I think happens much more particularly. And there's, so this is coming from Freakonomics in a recent podcast they had. Free advertising for another podcast. All right, whatever. But Freakonomics was talking about influence, and they interviewed an author of, I guess, a classic book on influence, who's kind of republished his original work. Anyhow, the one of the studies he cites in his more recent book looks at the behavior of mask wearing, and like the number. So after adjusting for all of these different things, even adjusting for political preferences, when you make whatever statistical adjustments for that, the only thing that stood alone as like a standalone factor that predicted mask wearing was the presence of people around you wearing masks. And just like how important it is for people who in your social circles to be wearing masks or not wearing them, and I mean, human nature certainly has not changed that much. I mean, and you're going to have camps of people. So I suppose like the way that breaks down in whatever town had the anti-masking league and the Spanish flu, and then whatever towns or, I mean, I suppose sectors of the population, um, nowadays that are anti-mask or vehemently pro-mask and, irrational in either direction, yeah, I mean, I think there's a complex social aspect, not in a global sense, but more in like yeah, I mean, just you're influenced by the people around you a lot. And I think more than you probably give credit for.
Yeah.
I think we're going to probably jump on the same thought, but I mean, yeah, just to like, I guess I wouldn't have thought of that, honestly, like right off the top of my head, but now that you say that, that certainly seems true. It's like my experience of different groups of people. Cause I like, um, so like to put like an actual face on it. I mean, I know people who I guess I feel like are very similar to me in terms of upbringing, culture we grew up in, where we're from, race, socioeconomic status. I mean, like we're pretty similar in thought process in a lot of ways, and yet act differently on the mask wearing stuff. And it does seem to be highly influenced by, I guess, I mean, kind of already said it, so I'm just hitting home, but it's like we've got some family members that I feel like were much less likely to wear masks than like we were, me and my family. And I remember thinking about it, like, couldn't really peg necessarily why. And because I feel like on most things we think pretty similarly, and on that one we seem to think very differently. But yeah, I guess one of the things was just kind of, I guess, where we live, people seem to, yeah, I mean, much more or less common, like the people around us, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't have thought about that initially, but like when you said that, I was like, huh, that seems to ring perfectly true to my experience of people wearing or not wearing masks. I think another, like, I don't know if you want to say difference, and I don't know, maybe this isn't an educated enough thought, but just to play with, just like the environment of what's going on at the time. Like, right, we commented the Spanish flu hits in 1918? So kind of the end of the First World War. So people have had 4 years of, at the time, the largest scale war in human history, and more death than probably people want to imagine. So it's kind of like, if you want to, like, there wasn't a similar event going on when COVID hit, for people to be comparing it to, if that makes sense. So it's like, yeah, maybe somebody died from COVID, but it's like for them, it's like if they had that same thing, it's like that was maybe a more normal thought. Is like, yeah, not everybody's just going to make it to old age, right? A ton of people died in World War One, so there might have been a little bit, or just kind of I'm fed up with having to deal with stuff, right? Like World War One probably sucked for people um, all over the place. So there kind of was maybe a little bit, like when we talk about the social conscious, I just think they had things going on that frankly we probably can't really relate to. And we're having to kind of compare the Spanish flu too, where with COVID, we just don't seem to have a similar, just a similar thing going on.
So they had World War One. They had Spanish flu. What else happened in 1918? Especially that a lot of Catholics might be aware of.
I hate it when you put us on the spot and we don't know the
You
answer.
do this all the time, Mike. What the heck?
I didn't even
What else happened on September 16th, 1918 at 4:30 in the morning? Nobody?
How could you not know?
Our Lady of Fatima appeared.
Oh. Oh, yeah, okay.
Can you imagine the people in Fatima, Portugal? World War One's going on. There's the Spanish flu. The Virgin Mary is appearing, causing the sun to. They couldn't have just thought the world was ending. They knew the world.
Gosh, holy smokes, dude! When you put it that way, how are there not riots in all of Portugal?
And I'm just.
Well, you guys probably know Portugal's near Spain, right? Spain wasn't hit as hard by the Spanish flu.
That's true. Yes, great little.
Wait, Spain wasn't hit by the Spanish flu? What? I don't get it.
Duh, because they were neutral during the war, and so all they talked about was the flu. That's infections. So everyone else called it the Spanish flu. Great marketing. Yeah, I was just listening to this great podcast. It's like the Unsolved Mysteries, and there's some crazy ones, but they actually devoted 2 episodes to Our Lady of Fatima. And yeah, not to go too much off track here, but man, they were left pretty stumped. There's a lot to those miracles that are still impossible to explain. But anyway,
Well, they had like thousands of eyewitnesses, right?
yeah, I mean that is documented, 100% true. Yeah, it's tens of thousands. I think 70,000 witnesses is what I've heard. And yeah, I mean they yeah, dancing sun, the sun painting colors in the sky, which some visitors still see today, actually. But yeah, crazy, crazy one for sure.
Hmm. Let's
Did- Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm interested in just this girl's story, the Lucian. So back, kind of coming back to the letter, because
Good.
um, so one experience I had, kind of like as COVID was just unveiling, and our hospital system just sent out a few like fairly dire emails, kind of like outlining that, things are shutting down. People who are not in, immediately necessary positions will be reassigned to whatever is needed. Um, and there's this kind of like dire atmosphere. And I just heard a number of different things from a number of different people. And I kind of had this vision of having to like serve as a nurse, like an unqualified, but slightly more qualified than the average person, just being a physical therapist, that like, oh shoot, like we're gonna, like, this is what I might have to do, and I'm gonna be watching people die, or I'm gonna be unloading trucks full of medical supplies in the pouring rain, or like just different like
Matt,
scenarios.
where's your
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, I don't know. But like this gal like actually lived it. Um, yeah, I guess that was the first thing that I thought of with just like reading this girl's letter, and just her experience with like having to face death. And I don't know, there's part of me that was like thinking about that, and not like, I don't know, I don't think it was completely like Don Quixote like fantasy. Like there was some level of legitimacy to like, just the uncertainty of the situation, um yeah, I guess that was kind of my first thought, just kind of trying to picture myself in her story. And I felt like I could picture the possibility, but obviously never lived it out. But anyway.
What's interesting, I guess, too, from that, kind of like you mentioned, like being in a hospital, it kind of made me think of, I remember, so I worked at a hospital during, I guess the worst of COVID. And, I remember doing the surge last fall, right? So that's when the numbers got bad, at least in our area. Like our hospital actually did, like we were concerned with being over full. Like there was this like legitimate concern of not having enough beds for the people. So I think when COVID first hit in that spring of 2020, the most patients we had, I mean, I think we had like 32 COVID patients in like a 3-month window. So, I mean, not very many. And then I think at one point, like on a single day last year, we had like well over 100 in one day. So just the numbers just shot up. And I remember like there did seem to be just a kind of a sense of, uh, just kind of people were kind of worn down. They were kind of ready to be done with it. They were tired. They were frustrated, all of that. But then I don't know. Like I feel like reading what Lucinta, what is her name?
Lucian.
Luciant. Sorry, reading Luciant's letter. Like I feel like I have a hard time really like bringing out how she felt about the situation. Because like I said, when we were in like kind of quote unquote the thick of it at the hospital, like there was definitely like high stress levels. People were frustrated. The hospital had to cut a lot of people because just they lost a lot of money. Um, so just I don't know. There's just definitely like a weariness, I guess. And like reading her letter, like I definitely think some of that comes out. Like she talks about going to a different room and crying. So I mean, she's not enjoying the experience, but like at the same time, she later in the letter, she talks about Washington being a beautiful place. The aviation field is another very interesting place. Airplanes fly over the city at all hours of the day. Like, kind of in some ways, she just described like it almost sounds like a postcard. Like she's just describing a normal experience. Um, so I feel like I had a little bit like when you said like you wanted to dive into Lucian's life. I feel like I had a little bit of a hard time really pinpointing like her, I guess, overall experience of the Spanish flu, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, I don't know if that resonates or not, but or if you guys had a similar thought.
It's interesting. Take a look here. The letter was written. Spanish flu officially started early 1918. They're about 8 months in. They have about 2 years still. Yeah, about 2 years still. So, man, it would be interesting, sort of like what you're saying, Ross, is to see what was going on with her by the end of the Spanish flu. Um, I sort of have to visit these things. Who knows what might come up them. I guess some things that sort of struck me about her letter. One, if she were alive today, she would be about 120 years old, which is would tie the world record of 122 years old, roughly, ever for an American. But it seems like she's just about within spitting distance of my grandparents. um, my grandparents were all born shortly after this in the early 1920s. And she, among recounting her experience in the hospitals in her letter, she also recalls just this extraordinarily serendipitous event of meeting this guy, this soldier at Union Station in St. Louis. Um, rather than trying to describe it, I'm just going to use her own words here. Let me go ahead and find my spot. I have a very dear soldier friend who is stationed at Potomac Park, Lieutenant Cantrell. 'Twas so funny how we first met. I was completely lost in St. Louis at the Union Station and simply had no idea where I was going. Just wandering around the station to pass away hours there and waiting for my train. Finally, I thought of sending O'Dial a telegram too. I waited and could not get in to send one, so I picked up my suitcase and traveling bag and started towards the ladies' waiting room. Instead of taking my own traveling bag, I left mine and picked up this soldier's bag. They were as much alike as two peas, and I was so tired I never took special notice, but I thought I had my own bag. When I opened it to get out my comb and powder, behold! There was a kit bag, fully equipped in a knitted sweater in it, plus a few other trinkets. I knew then whose bag I had, so I checked my suitcase and started to look for the soldier and exchange bags as I thought he had mine. So anyway, she eventually finds this guy. They switch up bags. He figures out that he's on the same train as her to Washington. Um, and we'll pick up where she continues talking about him. He has been down to our house twice to see me since I came back from Camp Humphreys, and he sure wants me to come down to Potomac Park as a nurse. He is not what one would call handsome, um, but he is certainly good looking. And on top of all that, he is a Catholic, all uppercase font. That was her words. Sure like it for myself too. All the girls have soldiers. Indian girls also. Some of the girls have soldiers and sailors too. The boys are really free. Girls, the Indian girls are not so easy as the white girls. So I guess maybe that's their reason. Anyway, it reminded me, in a sort of that serendipitous sense how my own grandparents met on my mom's side. Um, I was just asking my grandma about this, last week or a week and a half. Um, she was walking out of work on Belleville's Main Street. he was walking down the street. He was serving World War II. I don't know that he had his uniform on, but I sort of like to imagine it. He's walking down the street with like two other friends, and he ran into each other, and they started talking, and they walked together for a little bit. And about another week or two later, they ran into each other again as she walked out of the park there. So just that sort of like serendipitous way that they met and obviously fell in love and got married. So anyway, that sort of bit of the human story in the midst of this pandemic sort of struck me.
I think that there's something kind of beautiful about that, and in particular, thinking about, I think something that we have struggled with during COVID, like figuring out how to be kind of conscious of, our neighbor, and how to, you know, um, how to be charitable and respectful of other people, and, not try to spread a killer disease, but at the same time, like, life goes on, so like, for this Lutiant, right? She's on the front lines of the Spanish flu. She is in Washington D.C., right, acting as a nurse with people who are sick, and yet, she's also talking about finding this cute soldier that she likes. Not handsome, but however she worded it. But I think that there's just something, I don't know, kind of just human about that. Like, yeah, so she's living through World War I and being away from home and the Spanish flu and, all these terrible things. And yet at the same time, it's like, she's still just kind of able to move on with her life, in some way. And I think I don't know, I found that personally, I think I found that challenging during the COVID pandemic, is like how to, you know, kind of walk the line and not be rash and, like potentially spread a killer disease to people who could die, and yet at the same time not just shut myself in a hole and, hope it goes away. Um, so I don't know if there's a thought there or not, but when kind of reading about that, I feel like her letter was just kind of a lot of different things could be pulled out of it.
Um, is there a relationship between the religiosity of Black Lives Matter and COVID? I know, controversial question, but it's worth talking about, right? It's worth talking about.
Can you ask the question one more time so I can?
Yeah, I guess.
Is there a relationship between the religiosity of Black Lives Matter and COVID? So think about that question. It's a little bit less out of the blue than just simply my thoughts. This is from an article from the Smithsonian, which compares COVID to the 1918 pandemic. Yale sociologist and physician Nicholas Christakis hypothesizes that the 1918 pandemic falls into an ages-old pandemic pattern, one that our COVID-19 present may mimic too. In his 2020 book, Apollo's Arrow, The Profound and Enduring Impact of Coronavirus on the Way We Live, he argues that increasing religiosity, risk aversion, and financial saving characterize times of widespread illness. Just to set things up a little bit more here, again, it is controversial, where, but it's also really important, too, to try talking about in his academic and serious way, if nothing else is possible. We live obviously in a world that seems to have little use for like official religion, right? And just put everything out there. We're dealing with gr- one seminarian who discerned out, one guy whose brother is a fantastic priest, one guy who, well, it doesn't fall in either of those categories, but as these other two guys takes his faith, Catholic faith, pretty seriously. So kind of uniquely, we take religion fairly seriously, but a lot of our peers don't today. Right. And it's just simple observation, right? Not many people go to church every Sunday anymore. But I was listening to another podcast with a guy named Michael Shermer, who's an atheist, and he was talking about Black Lives Matter, anti-racism, in the academic sense of word, anti-racism. We're all anti-racist, I like to think, in the like most general sense of the word, but in this more sort of modern sense. And anyway, there was something on there that one of the people whom he was interviewing said that made me say, like, whoa, I've thought and said the exact same thing. It was this idea that what she was postulating, and Michael Shermer didn't seem to reject outrightly, even though he was an atheist, is that what she said was that this loss of religion, official sort of mainstream religion, in the past 30 or 40 years, like created a kind of vacuum, a social cultural vacuum that the fact is people need religion. We need rituals. We need things to believe in because simply we just can't prove everything, right? And the point that she was trying to making is that the way that these anti-racist behaviors and beliefs move in society and move in people, she thought it was strikingly similar to the way that traditional religion tends to move within people, kind of rejecting facts, um, identity becoming something very, very important. Um, so all these things being said, I'm sorry to cut myself off there. Give you guys an opportunity to share some thoughts related to this topic.
At first, when you brought that up, I was like, where the heck is that coming from compared to what Ross just said? But as you explained it more, I think there's like, I don't know, I think there's a very profound connection in that. So like what the pandemic made us, so Ross was talking about like the human elements, right? So this girl finding a guy she's interested in. I mean, who knows how the story ends up. Um,
I'm
no,
pretty sure they fell in love and got
I
married,
mean, yeah,
and it was a happy ending.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it is too. Um, so assuming that's the case, because there's no other reasonable end of that story, um, there are these human elements that are always uh, essential to the soul of an individual. And what COVID made us do, and what I think the Spanish flu perhaps did as well, is made us actually try to quantify or calculate what are the costs. Like what is it that we would pay to be human, or what is it that we'll give up um, to kind of preserve humanity in a more general sense. And I think what Black Lives Matter, and I think part of why it was, I mean, I think they're just the circumstances of, a number of controversial police actions. Like, I think that just the circumstances of that coming up. But also, I think COVID exacerbated just our desire for just human experience and human things. The desires to be together, desires for gathering, for education, for progress, civic engagement, whatever you want to call it. Um, I feel like just in the vacuum of that, um, with COVID, and then as Mike mentioned, like kind of the more cultural, I guess, longer term vacuum of like religious experience. Um, I guess like yeah, it makes perfect sense that Black Lives Matter and just religious wokeness in general, um, for any of those kind of ideological, uh, I don't know, interests. I think is just a manifestation of human beings seeking human things again. Seeking them again in relation to the absence of religion, but also seeking them again in relation to months of forced disengagement from that.
Hey, very well said, Matt. I think that's excellent. Let me try to back myself. 'Cause I don't want to just say things that seem off the cuff. The reason uh that I make this correlation between religiosity and certain um uh, public expressions of Black Lives Matter is, one that I was just talking to someone recently regarding the number of unarmed African Americans killed by police officers. I believe it was something like 15. I'm gonna get the exact number on this just so that
I think it's fair to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 25.
I mean
Like I know,
that's the
I
number
know it's
that I was
somewhere
thinking of,
15 to
right?
maybe 30 if you want to make it
Yeah.
just a little more
And
light, but
it's gone down. And obviously every single one of those deaths is tragic and should be prevented to every possible degree. But um that has even gone down significantly. I think it was like 45 is dozens upon dozens in like the I think past decade or something. Um Here's bring us home. What do we have in store? Well, we know what was in store for the pandemic 1920 to 1930. All of my grandparents were born. But we had, let's see, I think this sounds like something Matt would write. Troops came home, women got the votes from the 19th Amendment. Jazz happened. Radios, that was Ross.
that was for us. I didn't write
Native
anything on this one.
Americans became citizens of the U.S. People got cars. And we realized we were having too much of a good time, and we created prohibition at the end of the decade.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's crazy. When my grandparents, my grandma was still alive, was a kid, there it was illegal to drink alcohol.
Wrong. It was illegal to purchase or sell alcohol.
Oh,
You could technically drink it.
yeah, that's right. Sounds
There's a fun quip that somebody like beforehand like stockpiled and had like a ton of alcohol because it was technically, I think it was technically legal to drink. You just couldn't buy and sell, I think.
Yeah. What do our next 10 years store? Well, we already have jazz. Women already vote. Um, but I was reading some articles on this, and the point that they sort of made was that a lot of these things that created a roaring 20s were sort of like fomenting for decades. It did not seem obvious that the virus was their primary perpetrator or a cultivator of these things. But anyway, what are some things you guys see for the next 10 years? Maybe we can sort of hone in on our own lives, how we see them being affected by COVID, how we behave.
I think it makes me more ready to stockpile for the apocalypse that's inevitable. This was just a test.
I mean, I
Not
think
really, but yeah.
I feel like I don't know if this is a privileged thought or just an anticlimactic answer to your question, but like, I mean, what do the next 10 years look like for me? Not really any different than they did before. I mean, uh, still gonna do my exact same job. I'm still in the same house. Probably gonna, I mean, it's not gonna affect how many kids I have. I, I know, I feel like it's I mean, I think it's an interesting point that I'm saying it the way I am, so I hope it's coming through correctly, but like, I don't see myself living that much differently as if COVID happened or didn't once we get over the pandemic. Um, I don't know if that's a thought. Yeah, I don't know if that's an interesting thought or not, but
Yeah.
So I think realistically that's probably what's going to happen. But my stupid comment about the apocalypse was not entirely in jest, because I think it's at least opened up my mind to the possibility that our world could drastically change. You know, like obviously, I mean, looks like this is going to be a relatively temporary-ish thing. Like there's definitely going to be some long-term fallout, um, like general society-wise. And I mean, who knows what the general fallout was from the Spanish flu. Well, you know, like I know we talked about, I don't know if this was recorded or not, but like the talk about risk and how that might have been a thing that culturally changed after the Spanish flu. You know, did that lead to the Great Depression? You know, where you have people who are risk averse and not willing to invest in the stock market and very skittish when the stock market starts to crash. You know, all right, so like that's a scenario that I don't know, maybe that'll play out. But it's at least made me, I think, open to the possibility that like life could dramatically change, because like no one saw this coming. No one saw um, a society changed and turn on its head like it has been. Um, and like, okay, so what are the things that are really important? What are the things that um, are going to make like a multi-generational impact on the world? You know, if our world looks a lot different. So I don't know. I think it's at least made me start to think about what is it that I'm investing in, what is it that I'm um, doing, and how I'm spending my time. I think it's I think
Two
that's
reason
a critical thought.
two reasons why that's funny is it kind of looks like you're in like a deep stone basement right now. Like, are you in a bunker?
This is the bunker.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's just
I
a
mean it's
stone wall. Like, could be.
well, that's our apartment for the next few weeks. So 3 weeks we will have an actual house with a desk to broadcast from.
And second funny point, I did legitimately think it was either yesterday or today. Like, I had the thought, like, huh, you know, this happened and everybody wanted some N95s and you couldn't find them. Like, now that the mask mandates are over, like, I legitimately was like, I think I could probably buy a bunch of cheap N95s. So I almost went on Amazon. I think it was yesterday and was like, huh, I wonder how many, if I could buy like 50 of those for cheap, just in case.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I can definitely identify with your answer, Matt. Yeah, and just simple ways like buying a house. It's like, I live in a humble apartment here, and like being in an apartment, like man, that's probably one of the highest risk places you can be in a sense. Because apocalypse comes, you live in a house, no one's gonna come and take that away from you, even if it's not fully paid off. An apartment, my landlord is probably gonna kick me out and use it to store guns or something like that. Right? Um, I wash my hands a lot better than I used to, and I think I'm gonna continue doing that probably at least for a while.
That's a
Um,
good pickup line. You should use that.
I always wash my hands, just to be clear to the audience.
After camping with you as many times as I have, I just don't believe that.
Camp, camping's a different story. Different rules in camping. But anyway, yeah, those are some things there. It'd be fun to hear from our listeners. Listeners, why don't you shoot us an email using the email you can find on our website. We can check those out. Hear how your life has changed.
Why don't you just say the email in case our listeners don't feel like going to our website?
I don't remember it.
Don't worry, listeners, we check it regularly.
So, with that, any closing thoughts, ladies and gentlemen? Gentlemen, mostly. We have successfully sketched out the formation of America in the early 20th century. Coming up next, we have somewhere at the probably pre-World War II period, hosted by We have something coming up in the pre-World War II period, hosted by
That would be me.
I think it's Roth.
Rob. Come up with some gem there. Probably the beginning of King Roosevelt's reign, 50-year reign as king, something like that.
Right.
Folks, it's been
You're
great.
I wish.
It's been great chatting with you tonight, as usual. We can't wait to visit with you again in a few weeks and continue seeing how America unfolds.